We all love a good scary movie. The Silence of the Lambs, Psycho, even ones like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and House of a Thousand Corpses can have its charms. But when the movie is over, you're done. You put the movie away, delete it, or just click off and move on. Because it's just fiction. It's just some movie. It's not real, right? Except, sometimes it is. Just those four movies I mentioned were all somehow based on one single person. One real person who did unspeakable savage acts that would give anyone nightmares for a very long time. I hope you've been catching up on your sleep until now, because you're about to listen to the gruesome tale of the Butcher of Plainfield. Are you ready? Then take my hand, hold it tight, and let's walk into the darkness together. Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 17, 1906, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, to a small family of three that consisted of his brother Henry, who was about 5 years older than him, his father, George Philip Gein, who was a sort of jack of all trades, with some of his jobs consisting of selling insurance, tanning animal hides, carpentry, and at the time owning a mom and pop grocery store, and his mother, Augusta Wilhelmine Gein, who happened to be a devout Lutheran. As Edward grew up, a few things happened in the family. Augusta had slowly begun to resent George since they married because of his inability to maintain a stable job. This led her to become increasingly bitter, and she probably didn't avoid showing her disdain for her husband, which in turn caused George to resort to drinking, which only made Augusta resent him more. Now, as this vicious cycle began to happen, Augusta also began to teach her children the ways of the Lord, making sure that every afternoon she was able to get some Bible reading time in with them. She also began to instill her own beliefs into her children, telling them that men were weak and inferior to women, that drinking was evil, and that women were whores and instruments of the devil. The Bible studies that she was providing to her sons also began to revolve heavily around the book of Revelations from the Old Testament, and particularly around the areas concerning death and murder. Augusta had become convinced that any town or city life would ruin her children and make them sinners, and so she basically pushed her husband into selling the grocery store and moving into an isolated 155-acre farmhouse in Plainfield, Wisconsin. Augusta quickly made it a rule that the boys were to only leave the house to go to school and that they would come home immediately as soon as it ended. Any friends that the boys made in school, which was probably already hard for Ed due to a lazy eye and the growth in his tongue that resulted in a speech impediment, Augusta would instantly find reasons to hate, and she would forbid Ed and Harry from talking to them ever again, and she would punish them for it. Any visitors were quickly shooed away by her to prevent them from influencing her children. While the boys were home, Augusta would find chores for them to do around the farm to busy them up. As they grew older, Henry began to realize that the upbringing that his mother was providing for them wasn't normal. He rebelled and began to push his mother and her beliefs away. He even began to talk bad about her around Ed, who would become extremely hurt by this since, contrary to Henry, he had absorbed every word his mother said, idolizing her to the point of obsession. The stark contrast of opinions about their mother wasn't the only difference between the brothers. While Henry had been trying to construct a normal life for himself despite his mother's teachings, Ed continued to obey his mother, staying away from people, especially women. His classmates described him as shy and slightly strange since he had a habit of laughing at random moments for no apparent reason, as if he was laughing at a joke that only he could hear, and other strange mannerisms. On April 1st, 1940, at the age of 66, Ed's father, George, passed away. The brothers began to go into town and around the neighborhood to look for jobs that they could do to earn money and help maintain the household. Although they were considered slightly strange, people also found them to be dependable and honest workers, and so they would hire them as handymen. Ed also took jobs as a babysitter and did pretty well at it, since he actually felt like he related more to children than people his age. Now, for the next 4 years, things continued this way. Henry kept trying to make a normal life for himself and was actually succeeding. He met a divorced mother of 2 who he was attracted to, asked her out, and they began to date. Eventually, they even began to make plans to move in together. He also continued to try and talk some sense into his little brother and make him see the errors of their mother's teachings, but to no avail. Every time he brought it up, Ed would be shocked that Henry would talk that way about their mother. Ed was completely hurt by these talks and by Henry's audacity to go against their mother and her wishes. This is where the weird stuff starts to happen. On May 16, 1944, the brothers were working in the farm and lit a fire to burn a bunch of marsh vegetation in their property. The fire somehow gets completely out of control. The fire department arrives and puts out the fire, and everything seems to be okay. But at the end of the day, Henry seems to have gone missing. Ed calls the police and tells them that his brother had been working on the farm, that they lit the marsh and it got out of control, but it was now fine. Yet, he hadn't seen his brother since they started the fire. So the police come out with a small search party, and equipped with flashlights and lanterns, they begin the search for Henry, hoping for the best, but fearing the worst due to the fire. And after a while, they do find Henry, laying on the ground, face down, dead. Apparently, he seemed to be untouched by the fire and uninjured in any way, but they deduced that he had been dead for hours, so they figured that the cause of death was heart failure. Later on, it was reported that Henry had bruises on his head, and the county coroner listed Henry's official cause of death as asphyxiation. There was never an autopsy done, and the police ruled his death as an accident and never made an official investigation. So, the Gein household is now down to 2 members, Augusta and Ed. Shortly after Henry died, Augusta suffered a stroke that left her paralyzed. Ed, of course, dropped everything and devoted himself to his mother's care. In 1945, Ed and his mother made a trip to a nearby straw seller by the name of Smith to purchase the straw. When they arrived, Smith began to beat a dog for some unknown reason, and a woman came out of Smith's home and yelled at him to stop, but he didn't. He continued to beat the dog until it was dead. Augusta, who had witnessed all of this, became very angry and upset. But it wasn't because the dog had just been beaten to death in front of her, but because of the woman who had come out of the house to yell at Smith. Augusta complained to Ed about how Smith and that woman weren't married, and therefore that woman had no business being in the house, and she called the woman Smith's harlot. Augusta suffered a second stroke, and her health began quickly to go downhill from there. She eventually passed away on December 29, 1945, at the age of 67. Of course, this was extremely hard on Ed. Losing his mother was not just losing the last of his family, but he also lost his only friend and his idol. Ed had basically lost his whole world by losing her. Ed decided to remain in the farm. He boarded up all of the rooms that his mother frequently used to keep them as a sort of shrine, and moved to a small bedroom near the kitchen where he spent most of his time while in the home. The rooms of the house that had not been boarded up quickly went from pristine to pigsty, with Ed basically ignoring all of the house chores. Instead, he now devoted his time to doing odd jobs around town when they were available and reading adventure stories and pulp magazines. His favorites, you ask? Well, those of cannibals or ones that depicted Nazi crimes. At some point between 1946 and 1956, Ed sold an 80-acre parcel of land that Henry had bought and had passed to Ed after his death. In 1957, the government issued Ed a farm subsidy, so he did have enough money to maintain himself. He also worked for the municipal road crew and the threshing crews now and then. However, after his mother passed, the people who hired him and his neighbors began to notice that Ed looked more and more messy as time went by, and he began to show a hygiene problem that also grew on the daily basis. On the evening of November 15, 1957, Ed visited a hardware store owned by a woman named Bernice Warden. He went in presumably with the intention to purchase a gallon of antifreeze. For some reason which I couldn't find anywhere, Ed was told to return the next day to purchase it. So Ed did as he was told. He left and returned to purchase it the next day. Now, on the morning of November 16th at around 9 a.m., witnesses saw the hardware store's truck leave from the rear of the building. But due to deer hunting season, the hardware store didn't really have many customers that day. So it wasn't until the deputy sheriff, Frank Warden, who coincidentally happened to also be Bernice's son, walked in at around 5 p.m., that Bernice was noticed missing. Frank also found the cash register open and bloodstains on the floor. When investigators looked through the receipts, they noticed that Ed had been the last person to make a purchase that day. They arrested Ed at the Plainfield grocery store and got a warrant to search his farm. What they found in it was atrocious. They found Bernice's body decapitated and hanging upside down from her ankles in the kitchen, with ropes on her wrists and gutted open, her organs laying discarded in a bucket, except for her heart, which they found in a plastic baggie right in front of Ed's stove. Bernice's whole head was found in a burlap sack. They also found some small and not so small trinkets around the house that would appall any normal person, such as a wastebasket made from human skin, bowls made from human skulls that had their tops sewed off, a corset that had been made from a female torso complete with breasts, leggings made from human skin, whole human bones and fragments, several chairs that had been covered with human skin, masks that had been made from the skin of female heads, 9 different female genitalias in a shoebox, 2 more female genitalias that were believed to be from girls around the age of 15, a young girl's dress, fingernails from female fingers, a belt made from female nipples, a female nipple doorbell, 4 noses, a lampshade made from the skin of a human face, a pair of lips on the drawstring from a window's shade, an armchair made from human bones, a purse with a handle, of course made from human skin, a pair of human skin work gloves, a tom-tom drum made from stretched out human skin, and quite a few other horrors. He also had 4 more female human face masks at eye level on the wall. The worst part here, though, is that the farm had 0 electricity, so the poor officers had to search for and find all of these items in dimly lit rooms. Officials also found the face mask and skull of a 51-year-old woman named Mary Hogan, who was a barkeeper and had gone missing on December 8, 1954. The items were taken to the State Crime Laboratory, photographed, and then decently disposed of. When they interrogated Ed and questioned him about the items, Ed admitted that between 1947 and 1952, he had sneaked into 3 different cemeteries over 40 times and had dug up bodies that had been recently buried. He claimed that he had been in a daze-like state when all of this happened, and that in around 30 of these visits, he had snapped out of the daze, realized where he was and what he was doing, and had left empty-handed. He also claimed that he had made sure to leave the graves in good condition. The rest of the time, he had dug up the bodies and took them home. All of the graves that he had dug up happened to be of middle-aged women who looked like his mother. Once the bodies were at his home, he skinned them and tanned the skin, a trait that he learned from his father, of course. He would then take the bones and make something useful, like cutlery, or he would use them to decorate things like he did with his bed, where he put the skulls on his bedposts to look as if they were mounted on spikes. He admitted to stealing 9 different graves and agreed to lead officials to them. The cops tested Ed, trying to figure out if his testimony was truthful, because they didn't believe that Ed could do the job on his own. So they asked him to lead them to 3 different graves that he had opened. And it proved that he had indeed been honest with them, as they found the graves exactly as Ed had described them, with one casket being completely empty, another containing Ed's crowbar, which he had left behind, and the last having most of the body missing, but Ed had returned the rings and the body parts that he had not used. Ed told them that after his mother died, he had decided to create a woman's suit so that he could become her. Now, as creepy as that is, he also claimed that he had never had sex with any of the bodies because they smelled too bad. In fact, he also claimed that he had never had sex, period, except with himself, that is. And, of course, the reason why was because of his mother's teachings and beliefs. He also admitted that he had shot Mary Hogan, but he couldn't remember any of the details of the incident. During Ed's questioning, the sheriff, Art Schley, assaulted Ed by smashing his head and face into a solid brick wall due to the indignation and rage he felt because of what Ed had done. Because of his indiscretions, Ed's confession was ruled as inadmissible. The sheriff passed away of heart complications in 1968, shortly before Ed was tried. Some say that between the fear of having to revisit Ed's crimes for the trial, which had left him traumatized, and the fear of having to testify about his assault towards Ed, his heart just couldn't take it and gave up. On November 21, 1957, Edward Gein was arraigned on 1 count of first-degree murder. He pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Psychiatrists had found him unfit to stand trial and diagnosed him with schizophrenia. Due to this, he was institutionalized at the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, which is a maximum security facility. He was later transferred to the Mendota Mental Health Institute in 1968. The doctors at the facility determined that Ed was now mentally able to participate in his own defense, so he was put on trial on November 7, 1968. That trial lasted a week. In it, psychiatrists revealed that Ed had confessed to them that he had no idea if killing Bernice had been intentional or not. He claimed that while he was examining a gun at Bernice's hardware store, the gun went off accidentally and killed her. He claimed that he hadn't aimed at her, but he couldn't remember anything else that happened during that morning. Ed was found guilty on November 14th. There was a second trial that was held to judge Ed's sanity, and after that one, Ed was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was ordered to be institutionalized. His farm, including both the house and land, was appraised at $4,700, which is roughly around $50,000 today, and was set to be auctioned off on March 30th, 1958. However, a fire destroyed it before then. Arson was suspected but never investigated, and I'm sure Sheriff Frank Warden, Bernice's son, had absolutely nothing to do with that. On July 26, 1984, Ed passed away in the Mendota Mental Health Institute at the age of 77 due to respiratory failure after having suffered lung cancer. Through the years, many people chipped off pieces of his gravestone as souvenirs, and then in 2000, someone decided they'd just take the whole thing. A year later, it was recovered somewhere near Seattle, Washington, and it was taken back and put under lock and key at the county sheriff's office. Now the gravesite is unmarked, but if you choose to do a little dark tourism, you can easily find it between that of his brother and his parents. Now there was quite a few other cases that Ed was suspected of, including the disappearance of Georgia Jean Weckler, an 8-year-old little girl. But a lie detector test did absolve him of these. Yet we all know that some people can trick those, so yeah. The state also decided not to go on with the trial for the death of Mary Hogan, since he would be found not guilty again by reason of insanity, and all it would do is cost the city money, which I disagree with, since I'm sure that it would have given some sort of closure to Mary's family. So that's it for today. Had you heard about the infamous Butcher of Plainfield before? Let me know in the comments below. You can also let me know where you're from and if you found me through a bill. You can help my small channel grow by sharing it with others who love creepy, grave-robbing murderer stories just like us. And as always, please remember to like if you liked and subscribe if you want more. I'll see you next time.